Thank you for finding the NSE podcast on YouTube. To find links for our online hospitality security training, check out the video description below. Enjoy the Nightlife Security Podcast. You're listening to the Nightlife Security Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Black Diamond Radio. Visit blackdiamondradio.com. Welcome to the Nightlife Security Podcast, a professional resource for the nightlife security industry. Whether you're a hospitality security professional, owner, or operator, this is the podcast for you. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain. Let's get started. Welcome to the Nightclub Security Podcast. This is Manny Marquez, your host. As always, I am here with hospitality security industry expert Robert Smith and my business partner and my friend. We're here in studio in San Diego on a clear, windy fall day. It's actually Thanksgiving when we're recording this. Happy Thanksgiving, Robert.
Thanks, buddy.
How you been?
Good. Staying busy. Thank you.
Yeah, we're always busy, always got something going. But the reason for today's podcast, or I guess our topic for today's podcast, is the recent events that unfolded in Colorado Springs, Club Q, the shooting incident that's basically been the topic of discussion and all the media has been covering it. Robert and I had a couple back and forths about what unfolded there, and we wanted to just get a podcast out and talk about a couple of things. Robert, just kind of give us an overview of the events that unfolded in Colorado Springs.
So, as we've taught for years, this was a planned shooting. This gentleman, this shooter, had his weapons bought legally, came in with two weapons, long gun, AR style, and handgun. As soon as he entered the venue, he started shooting. People ducked, people ran, and he started shooting, killing, and injuring people. He walked by several people. Again, as we've taught shooters will do, they walk by people because they're playing whack-a-mole with their gun, shooting whatever moves. And as he shoots, he continues to move forward. A guest, Mr. Richard Fierro, saw that he had walked by, grabbed him, pulled him back, knocked him down, separated him from the weapon, and the shooting and carnage was over.
Let's pause for a second here on the gentleman who, as the media has been portraying him, the hero of the story, Mr. Fierro. Let's come back to that. But one of the things that I hear you say often with clients and in training is the concept of trying to find a solution to this problem. And you use the phrase, the genie's out of the bottle. Can you explain to our listeners what you mean by that?
I've been to numerous conferences on active shooters and the different types of emergencies and dangerous things that can happen. And every single one, some very knowledgeable person, talking head, media personality, law enforcement personality that is now retired and on TV, they've all talked about we need to try to find a way to put the genie back in the bottle. And I raised the question one time, why don't we consider the genie is out of the bottle and we can't put it back in? It's just one different take on that idea. We're not going to stop guns. We're not going to stop mental health. We're not going to stop hate, but we can try to understand it and then come up with a solution to that genie being out of the bottle.
Yeah, I know that we've had some pushback from either people we work with or clients that they really think that there's an alternate solution, that somehow through gun control laws, red flag laws, just general gun control restriction on firearms, that we're going to be able to pull back or solve this solution. And I think it's your standpoint that may happen, but it's not happening anytime soon.
We've done this dance of solving very difficult problems in our country for 100 years. In my lifetime, we stopped smoking in bars. We've created helmet laws for kids. We don't let kids ride in many states in the back of pickups. And that was all because people were dying and disease. But it was one easy fix. This is a complex problem that requires complex solutions, like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. 999 of those pieces are everything people are talking about, from gun control to mental health to new laws to red flag. All of the things are there. But what no one is talking about is what we've been preaching for years, except that they're going to happen. But now let's add in a solution to when they do happen. What do we do when they do happen to limit the damage?
So the point is that this is the reality of the world we live in. And for us in hospitality, bars, nightclubs, restaurants, entertainment venues, I think what you're saying is rather than us dwelling or spending a lot of time on a solution, which we still should work towards, what you're saying is at the moment, let's accept it as the reality. Now, what do we do?
We can do 2, 3, 4 things at once. Let the organizations working on gun violence prevention do what they're doing. God bless them. But why not have another piece added within the hospitality industry? When you onboarded a new employee, you walked them around your building. You showed them the exits, the kitchen, the bathrooms. You told them what their jobs were or weren't, what they weren't supposed to do. Customer service was a huge part of that. Part of that discussion within our industry must be active shooter awareness. What do you do? What will you do when it happens? And we're not doing that enough.
You know, one of the things that in our discussions before this recording and this podcast was just the idea that when you watch the news, whatever channel it might be, they have a lot of talking heads, a lot of pundits. They're offering their solutions, but the one thing they're not talking about is
the training,
right? So
this is, and this really hits home to me as a former San Diego police officer in the 90s and 2000s. San Diego was leading the country in problem solving and community policing. And part of that, what I learned, was the SARA model, where you scan what the problem is. We know what the problem is here with gun violence. We know what the problem is within the hospitality industry. And then you go to the assessment. How do you solve it? What are the many solutions possible? And one of those solutions to solve this is train the staff what they do when it occurs. So when the gun comes in, we don't get 50 dead, we get 5 dead. I know it's a terrible, terrible way to think about it, but we're not having 45 people killed because our staff was trained on what to do.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us back to what happened in Colorado Springs. And if you can, just to kind of recap for the listener, in case they haven't heard the details, just kind of give an overview of the events that unfolded and then the response of a couple of individuals and how it played out.
So I've asked people, when I've given these classes around the country and different cities have invited us, or different organizations or venues, clients, I use examples. And sometimes they'll come up after and ask me for proof of these examples. And I get it. This is a new concept for some of them. We have video evidence of one patron, one guest, doing exactly what he was taught from the time he was probably 10 years old in school. Active shooter drills in school taught you to run and hide. They didn't talk about fighting. Run and hide. One patron, probably the first interview I saw, was a gentleman in his early 30s or late 20s. He said, I heard gunshots. I heard the shots. I realized they were gunshots, and I ran. Perfect. He did just what he was supposed to do. Then the second thing he did, he ran to a place he could hide. Perfect. He never once mentioned in his interview, I considered fighting. He did what he was taught to do, run and hide. Now another customer, the gentleman, Mr. Fierro, he had none of that training in school. He's in his mid-50s or 60s, but he had military training. And from day one, they're teaching you to fight, to be the aggressor, to have a fighting mindset. The shooting started. He thought they were balloons. Then they continued. He realized they were gunshots, people on the ground. He saw the shooter go by him, and he immediately knew he could attack. And he did. And he stopped multiple people from dying after the original people that were already shot. He ran after the shooter, grabbed him from behind. He knew the danger, but he acted on his own training and instinct based on what he'd been through in his life in the military.
Robert, I want to just pause for a second. I want to give our sponsors of today's show an opportunity to get a mention. But when we come back, I want to revisit a couple of things. One of them is the traditional response, the run, hide, fight. And then I want to talk more about Fierro's response and what happened in Colorado Springs at Club Q. So let's just take a quick break. We'll come right back. When Nightlife Security Consultants recommends radios to our clients, we recommend Black Diamond radios. Why? They're the best in the business. Simple as that. Tired of the high cost of replacing broken radios? Black Diamond Radio has an industry-leading 2-year warranty. If you can break a Black Diamond radio, they will replace it. No hassles, no questions. It's time to beef up your nightlife communications. The Black Diamond D452 radio is the most durable radio on the market. Black Diamond built this radio with hospitality nightlife in mind. Built for high noise environments, it's shock and water resistant. And it has a long-lasting battery. Your security team has a tough job. They need a tough radio. Need more than just radios? Black Diamond Radio is your one-stop shop. Radios, earpieces for competitor brands, silicone ear molds, foam ear molds, earpiece adapters, and much, much more. Just go to blackdiamondradio.com for all your radio needs. Black Diamond Radio's customer service is second to none. Got a question? Call Black Diamond Radio during regular business hours, and you'll always speak to a live customer representative ready to assist you. Get 10% off your order today. Just click on the Black Diamond Radio banner on the nightlifesecurity.com homepage or on our podcast show notes. Make sure to use promo code NIGHTLIFE7. That's NIGHTLIFE and the number 7 and order today. All right, we're back. Robert, before the break, we were talking a little bit about traditional response, the run, hide, fight, and how that's what's taught in schools. That's for what most people, that's probably the extent of their training and their know-how and how to deal with these situations. I want you to elaborate a little bit on that.
So it's really unique, that, and I try to impress upon our clients and anyone who's in our class for this active shooter training we do. It's a 3 to 4 hour class, and we only spend about 10 to 15 minutes talking about running and hiding. And part of that reason is run-hide training started in 1999 after Columbine. And it continued for 20 years, and it's still taught run and hide in our schools today. There is no run, hide, fight. That came through FBI and Department of Homeland Security maybe 15 years ago when they started teaching adults from stores and businesses and offices. They added in fight. But those are people that are in their 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Our youth are still getting the training, run and hide. And in this case at Club Q, one customer, I described him already, he ran and he hid, perfect. But then there was Mr. Fierro. He didn't get any of that training in school. He had his training from the military, 13, 14 years in the military, a combat in Afghanistan or where he was at in the Middle East. He went into fight mode immediately. He ducked like everyone else did, but he saw the opportunity and he did what he was trained to do. The shooter, much larger man than most of these people, had already walked by Mr. Fierro. Mr. Fierro saw the backside of the shooter as he's carrying his gun in front of him. He ran a 15-foot, 20-foot distance. He grabbed the shooter by the back of his vest he had that he was wearing, pulled him backwards in a violent manner, knocked him to the ground, and that separated the shooter from his own weapon. Why? Because the shooter was not prepared to be touched. He had prepared to just kill people and they would run, and people were running. Mr. Fierro knew if you separate the shooter from his weapon, the shooting stops. One of the things we teach, very similar to what Mr. Fierro did, control the weapon, you control the shooter. And that's what he did. Once he got him to the ground, the shooting was done. The shooter pulled out his handgun. Mr. Fierro took that from him easily, started beating him with it. Other guests approached and started hammering on the shooter. But the important point here is, if we're not talking about fighting, if we're not bringing it up in the context the way Mr. Fierro saw what he had, he knew it was dangerous. He knew there was gunfire, but he saw the safe opportunity to run behind the shooter and grab him. Now that would seem alien and strange to most anyone in the position being in a bar having a good time. But if we're not talking about it and we're not practicing it on our own, it's going to stay alien and people are going to continue to die at higher numbers. Mr. Fierro acted, he grabbed the shooter, separated the weapon, and the shooting stopped.
Yeah, I think the point that you're trying to drive at is, I mean, we've been through numerous shooting events in the media over the last several years. And as we said before, the pundits, the politicians are offering these solutions. And I think the crux of our conversation today is, all right, so what happened in Colorado Springs? What can we learn from this? And I know the point is on your side is people's ability to put themselves or think about themselves in that situation and have the idea that the best response might be to fight, to react, to engage the shooter. I know through your training that through law enforcement, you have a point that as soon as police engage a shooter, there's a drop in the potential of harm or death to others, right?
That's right. The FBI did a study 30 years ago or more. As soon as the shooter or the attacker in any situation is engaged by another violent force, be it police, be it a citizen, they have to quit killing people and defend themselves. And that's such an important point for our listeners to understand. The shooter will have to then defend themselves.
And we kind of grappled on a title for today's show, and what we decided on is an active shooter in your venue. Plan on it, have a plan on it happening, right? We need to have these discussions. We need to, as owners, operators, managers, and as employees and general citizens, just people out and about, plan on this happening. If you at least can plan on it happening, it may never happen, and the chances of an event, you being involved in an event, an active shooter event, is highly unlikely. But let's spend the time to think about it and at least develop a plan in our venue.
I just can't. I get frustrated, but I continue to push the same message, and sometimes my clients or our clients will hear it, and I know they're getting it when they start texting me about how they did this and what they did and how they stopped this or stopped that. And that continues to help me push forward in saying we can limit the damage. If we just know that it could happen and we're talking to our hostess in front or a host in front, we're talking to our bartenders, our servers, we don't have to wait for the police to save us. There's over 50% of shooters around our country. 50% of these guys are stopped by non-law enforcement people. We don't hear about it because maybe no one dies. There was a gentleman in Memphis, I believe, and he saw a gun being carried by a gentleman, and he knew it wasn't right. Instinctually knew it wasn't right, and he needed to act. He ran from the patio he was in. He grabbed the gun from behind the person, held it against the guy's chest. 2 other citizens came and helped him. Nobody died. This guy was going to kill people. He said it. We don't hear about those. If our clients and our listeners can understand, talking about it will open the mind to people. And once their mind is open, they'll start thinking on their own. What would I do if this guy came through the front door? What would I do if this shooting erupted in my patio? What would I do? Maybe running will come up. Maybe hiding will come up. But now we can say, at least there's a chance that fighting can stop the carnage.
And as an operator, myself, being in that position, I think about how I would approach this with my employees and my team, right? So if I work in a venue and our mantra is run, hide, fight, my thought is, okay, as a manager responsible for these people, if we're going to run, what does that look like? Knowing all your exits, knowing what that would look like if we generally would have somebody coming in through the front door. If we hide, where are we hiding? Where are our hiding locations? Teaching our employees that. On the hide side, I always think about, a cooler or a freezer would be a good place to hide, right? Because you could potentially lock that and be safe. But if I'm in a cooler or a freezer, how do I turn that off if it's an extended amount of time? Right? Like understanding those contingencies or the things that you might have to think of at the moment, let's think about them ahead of time and instill that plan in the management and the staff.
And it's not hard to do. It's another 20 to 30 minutes of onboarding training. And maybe once every 6 months, you have a team meeting, and that's one of the points you discuss, the things you just covered.
Yeah. And then on the fight side, having a discussion with your employees of what are improvised weapons? What are things that we could use against an active shooter at that point? Where are positions we could lie? Could we possibly come up with hand signals that would help our staff identify or help them recognize what we were thinking or planning in the middle of a situation. All those things can be done ahead of time. Now, again, highly unlikely that we're going to be in this situation, but let's plan for the worst and hope for the best, right?
And it doesn't change your cost. So operators are worried about their cost. You're going to have a team meeting anyway. You're onboarding the employee anyway. It doesn't change your cost to teach them a little more. And I guarantee you, like many of our clients have said, they started doing pat downs or wands. And they were resistant against it in the beginning at the door to prevent weapons from entering. And 9 out of 10 continue to do it because the employees have learned to do it. They're doing it respectfully. They're doing it right. They found weapons, but more importantly to the owner or managers, the customers have said, hey, thanks for doing that, because they feel safer when they come in. And we've just prevented what we teach as the unplanned shooting when we're checking people at the door, fully screening purses, fully screening females. This was not an unplanned shooting, but my point is the employees can learn to do it, and it costs no extra money to do these things to prevent, or in the case of fighting, to stop these things.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, I think it's on people's minds. We get the news stories and then we just kind of go about our lives and continue. Our point is, and the point of this podcast is, start developing a plan, start thinking about it, start thinking about how can we train our team? How can we give them more tools, resources, and information to save lives? Because as we said at the top of the show, the genie's out of the bottle. This is our reality. This is what we live in day to day. No matter what type of venue you run, large, small, entertainment, everyone needs to be having this discussion. And part of what we do is an active shooter awareness training. And we talk about this. We have a 4-hour session where we discuss this at length. We give team members the opportunity to engage. We've done this for our clients. We've done this for communities. We just did one. You were in DC.
Right. The city sponsored it. The Nightlife Association sponsored it. The Restaurant Association sponsored it. And it's unique. It's not unique to me. I've heard it many times when I've done these for cities, where the officer that comes behind me and talks says to me, I don't even need to give my session, because their session, their training was on the generic type of shooter. They don't talk about the cooler. They don't talk about the bottle from the bar. They don't talk about the door host. They talk about
you mean like a bottle as an improvised weapon?
As an improvised weapon.
Yeah.
They talk about in generic terms
the responses
to run and hide. They cover a lot of information on running and hiding.
And their part of the training is what they want from the venue as far as notification, and then what to expect on a police response side, right?
It's just crazy that this hasn't grown to say, okay, cops, city, you come next. What we're doing in Miami, what we did in DC, where we'll do our 3-hour training instead of the 4, but we'll give them the last hour. And our last part of the training, to further push this into the minds of the employees, is okay, now you understand the 2 types of shooters. Now you understand what your response could be, running, hiding, but more important,
and when you
fighting.
say 2 types of shooters, you're talking about the unplanned, right? It just happens to be somebody has a gun in the car or on them, an argument. That's one type.
That's
the
right.
The other type is a planned, which what happened, Club Q in Colorado Springs.
Correct. And once the employee knows those points, and I'll call them minor points, these things build. And once it builds to the point where the end of our training, we do a role play with a blank gun, and they get to see it and experience a mock argument, mock shooting. Then we say, okay, police, someone's called 911. Now the police can come in. They don't have to talk about hiding and running. They talk about what their response is. And the employees can see the progression from the door, the floor, the argument, or the gun coming in the front door, shooting starts, continues to go, and what the response would be, and finally what the police response is.
Yeah. So again, reiterate the point, start the discussion. At the very least, have a discussion with your security team to start.
Let me add 2 more things real quick, small things. Every time I give the class around the country, an employee will raise their hand and say, Robert, if I hit a guy with the head of the bottle, he might die. And I say, so what? He's shooting people. And I want to take a page out of Club Q. They were openly saying how they were beating this guy. One of the drag queens or someone dressed as a female with heels on stomping him. If you saw the mugshot, he is battered and bruised. You have not heard one peep about anyone being charged or arrested because this guy was there to kill people. So no, if you do use force, you're going to be okay. Number one. Number two, your customers want to go to a safe venue. If your employees are trained in hospitality, that's a great side to get people to come back. But when the employees know they're trained on what to do for a shooting event, either planned or unplanned, that will resonate with your clients too. They'll know they're in a safer venue. They'll know your people have this type of training. They'll enjoy that even more, that experience even more. But it starts with the training of your employees.
Absolutely. So just to recap, start the discussion, think about training. And this is not something that, as far as training or the discussion, is just for the owners, operators, the employees. I think this is a good thing for the general public to be thinking about, to be armed with this information. If you're a venue who is looking to train their staff, that's something that we do here at NSC. If you're a city official, a business improvement district, if you help organize entertainment districts in your community, reach out to us. I'll give some more information on how to get a hold of us at the bottom of the show. But I think, again, just start having the conversation, thinking about reaction, and thinking about engaging, right?
Absolutely.
If there's an opportunity to engage a shooter, you might be at risk, but at that moment,
it's so unique, Manny. And I know you're closing out. And when employees come to me after, here's a 100-pound female door host, 20 years old, and she'll come up to me because I'll use her as an example at the door, where she ducks behind her counter, her podium, and the shooter walks by in the scenario. She can absolutely be the hero, so to speak, in this event if she just grabs that gun. But she's not going to ever do it if she doesn't start thinking about it.
Because once you always say in training,
if you control that weapon, you control the shooter.
Right. So something to think about. And then if we have an organized plan and there's multiple people engaging, you outnumber an individual shooter. I mean, an organized venue outnumbers that person. And it's just a matter of having that plan in place, thinking about it, at least having the discussion. Again, hopefully it never happens. But if it does, you're better prepared, and your preparation at the very end could save lives.
Absolutely.
So we're going to close it out. We'd like to thank our listeners for joining us today. You might be listening to this in the future, but happy Thanksgiving anyway. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Hey, listeners, before we go, I just wanted to thank you for spending the time today with us, listening in on the conversation. If you want to learn more about what we do and how we can help your venue achieve your security goals as far as operations goes, visit us at nightclubsecurity.com. You're going to find a whole bunch of free resources, anything to do with hospitality security, as well as our online training programs we have to offer. If there's any sort of questions, comments, things you'd like to ask us, feel free to send me an email. My email address is Manny, MANNY, at nightclubsecurity.com. We would love to hear from you. And until next time, this is Manny Marquez thanking you for listening. And until then, be safe.